This is the second in a series devoted to the how-to of installing the nozzle circuit. The topic is tools and consumables, where we ask our contributing dealers to look through their vehicles and give us a list of tools that they consider essential. For organization, we put them each into one of three groups. Tools and materials you would use while designing a system prior to presenting a bid. Tools you would use during installation and/or during service calls. And materials and hardware that would be consumed and become part of the installation. We'll start with system design tools. An important step, especially if you are just getting started in the business, is to consolidate your ideas into a scaled diagram of the installation plan. We're fans of including a drawing in your proposal because it's a great way to document your plan for the installation, and it serves as a basis for determining what components you need. It also helps to professionalize your proposal. So the tools we'll mention in this section help you do that. The first, and probably most obvious, is a clipboard. Our dealers seem to prefer the kind with an attached organizing box to hold pencils and pens, a straight edge and a calculator, as well as design forms. They also use a measuring wheel with a kickstand to gather dimensions of the property. Apparently you get what you pay for with measuring wheels, and we got the advice to not go cheap on this tool. You can develop your drawing either on simple grid paper, or you may want to invest some effort into learning how to use some kind of graphics software. At MistAway, we use a package called Visio for drawings to support our dealers. Now let's move on to the tools you'll use during the installation itself. We've organized these into three groups. We'll speak first about some tools that are pretty unique to misting with respect to working with the nozzle circuit. Then we'll move on to list the general tools you'll need. You probably already possess most of these. Finally, we'll list a few items that our dealers mentioned as important that you might not have thought of. There are a few tools that are specific to working with the nozzle circuit. Obviously, you'll need a tube cutter with a sharp blade so that you don't deform the tubing when you cut it. Alternatively, some of our dealers use a cable cutter or a PVC pipe cutter. You'll also find a tube release tool like this one handy when you need to pull tubing out of a fitting. Many of our dealers also use a tubing reel that they can wheel around, but is heavy enough to stay put as you are pulling the tubing off. Other dealers simply leave the tubing reel in the box and pull tubing out as they need it. You'll also want a pressure tester like this one so that you can test the pressure at some of the nozzles to ensure they are misting in the target zone. We emphasize in our training that you should pay attention to the flow rate of the nozzles, since the effectiveness of the system depends on it. So you might also want to carry one of these plastic graduated cylinders so you can actually measure and confirm the flow of a few nozzles. Now let's move on to the more general tools the installation will require. In the previous video in the series, we mentioned that it's important to keep the nozzles, fittings, and tubing dirt-free during the installation, so you don't plug everything up when you pressure up the system. And a tool belt is a key part of that. Look for something with a number of deep pouches to separate nozzles, fittings by type, and clamps, as well as to hold a screwdriver, drill, or stapler. You'll also need a couple of ladders to access fences, eaves, and trees. Our contributing dealers recommended carrying 6-foot and 8-foot ladders. You probably shouldn't be installing nozzles higher than you can reach with those. One of the most important tools is a cordless drill with a couple of spare charged batteries. You'll also need a variety of bits, screwdriver bits, a nut driver for securing clamps, and a 1/2-inch paddle bit for drilling through fencing. In the hopefully rare event that you need to run tubing underneath and across a sidewalk, you can use a 72-inch semi-flexible cable bit like this. Many of our dealers prefer to carry a small drill with screwdriver bits for securing clamps. You may want to use a coax cable stapler like this one to secure tubing to a fence or eave. On this topic, our dealers are evenly divided into two camps. Those favoring clamps think the look is cleaner and more professional. They also said that staples can rust and need to be replaced over time. The other group liked the look of the staples and favored the increased speed of using staples versus clamps. You'll have to make the decision for yourself. You'll also find pliers will come in handy in case you need to remove staples. You'll need something like a PVC or pipe cutter so you can cut lengths of funny pipe or other flexible conduit for transitions. For digging trenches to install a nozzle run made up of landscape risers, we like this landscaping edger. You can also use a flat edge spade. It's also a good idea to carry a trowel or gardener's shovel for working in spaces that are too cramped to use a long-handled spade or edger. To flatten trenches dug for risers, some of our dealers use a tamper like this one. For durability, we were advised to get one with a fiberglass handle. In addition to these, our dealers mentioned a few other items they wouldn't leave off their trucks. Use a union with a plug, like this, to cover the end of the tubing and keep it clean as you're laying it in a riser trench or feeding it through a hole you've drilled through a fence. Use painter's tape for marking nozzle placement on a fence or eave prior to installation. You can use a multimeter, like this one, to determine if you've got power to an outlet and also to determine if you've got sufficient voltage to be able to operate the system. Rather than relying on their customers to have a hose handy to refill a drum unit, some of our dealers carry their own garden hose. Many of our dealers also carry an air compressor, like this one, on their trucks. They use it to blow the fluid out of the nozzle circuit as part of the winterization process. And last but not least, more than one of the dealers we polled said they keep mosquito repellent on the truck, since the mosquito problem is severe on many of the properties where they install systems. They also said they frequently encounter wasps or hornets and also carry wasp killer. Now let's spend a minute talking about consumables, the items you'll use up during the installation process. For securing tubing to fences or eaves, we sell a variety of what we call Dyna clamps that come in white and black and include the screw. We also sell plain 1/4 inch clamps, where you'll need to provide either a deck screw if it's going into wood, or a cement anchor if it's going into concrete. You'll also find 3/8 inch clamps like this one useful in securing the nozzles. For these, you'll also need to supply screws. If you decide you want to use staples to secure tubing, you'll need to supply some coax staples. You'll find zip ties handy for things like securing tubing to a gutter to make an eave run, or securing tubing to a wrought iron fence. Be sure to get UV-rated plastic so the sunlight doesn't eat it up. You may also want to invest in a cable tie wire gun like this one, which makes it easy to cinch and cut the ties as you put them in place. For making transitions from one surface to another, say from a fence to a landscape bed, you should use either funny pipe like this or flexible aluminum conduit around the tubing to protect it from weed eaters. Some of our dealers told us they use sod staples like these in their installations. You can use the staple to keep tubing in a trench, or you may find that rather than burying tubing in a landscape bed, you can use the staples to simply pin it to the ground. Finally, many of our dealers place concrete pavers on the ground in order to create a flat, clean spot to place the unit. In this case, we're demonstrating the use of 4 12-inch squares butted together. You may be able to find larger pavers, but they are very heavy to carry off the truck into position.